Okay, thank you very much, Bob.
Oh, thanks a lot. That's a issue of Apple and Windows. Happened before. I actually normally bring my own projector and it didn't get plugged in. Don't think about that. Look, thanks for having me. It's a great spot here, as well as selling one hive, and the one that you're getting is this one. I'm going to leave a few hives here on adjustment. I'm getting so many hives. I've got something like somewhere between 200 and 300 in on my 1 acre Sanford, and the airspace is getting a little bit congested. So I need to find places to put them, and I need to find ways of working with that number of hives. I'm finding that my days are getting very full. They say in retirement you've got time to do all the things you couldn't do before, but now I haven't got remotely enough time to do the things that I think I should be doing. So the subject at hand, actually it's all I ever talk about, and that's bees. I might diverge a little bit onto 3D printing, but all 3D printing is for bees. So it's only a minor diversion anyhow. So I'm a bit of a one-subject speaker, unfortunately. I had thought one day I'd try to find another hobby, but I don't think it would work. I'll find a way of steering it towards bees. Now, we've got some 2,000 species of native bees in Australia, but only about 14 thereabouts of those are stingless. The rest of them are quite capable of stinging. The ones that don't sting all pretty much look like this. They are social, they have queen drone workers. They're not all about 5 millimetres long or smaller. The rest of that 2,000, 1,986, some minus, are solitary, can sing and sing repeatedly just like a wasp. They're not like a honeybee. The only thing is they don't normally sting because they haven't got a nest to defend. They've got no reason to sting. If you pick them up and grab them in your hand, that's reason to sting. If they happen to land on your washing and they're in a jacket and you put that on, that's reason to sting. But some of those bees get up to 3 centimetres long, so that's potentially quite a major sting. Now I don't know what the allergy type response of the stinging bees is compared to the honeybee, but I know some people are quite allergic to stings of the honeybee, but I suspect the toxins are different, but sufficiently similar to be careful of all the others. Just something I have to say, we've been just a bit casual about all the other 2,000 around, but they can sing, just be careful. Now, but they are native. There's been a bit of a casualness about the Australian terminology. We talk about native bees, and what does that mean? Some people even, I get phone calls, we've got native bees in the wall. I've taken to getting people to send me a photo, so I know what they are. Because people think that a feral honeybee is native. They've been here 200 years, but they're not native. They're exotic, introduced bees. They've been here so long, everyone knows them. They've been in bushland for so long, they're just assumed to be part of the landscape. But they were introduced in 1832. Those first species first strains, they swarmed perhaps a dozen times a year. So, which is good for the beekeepers because they got to catch lots of swarms. But what it did in the landscape, I should have gone, what it did in the landscape, as early settlers moved out, honeybee was always there where they went, but the honeybees moved ahead of English settlers. So the very early settlers, they could simply get honeybees from the trees around them. As they cleared trees, they would collect bees from those trees. But that had a cost, and the cost is in the wildlife that did occupy the trees, the hollows. Now in Australia, there's been another introduction. The small hive beetle. For those people, does anyone keep honeybees? No one keeps honeybees. But if you keep honeybees, you'll most definitely know the small hive beetle. It's a scourge of honeybee keepers. It's killed thousands of hives of honeybees since it was introduced around the time of the Sydney Olympics. There was believed to be something to do with horse feed for the Sydney Olympics. But now it's all over Eastern Australia, right out to the Channel Country. It simply migrated with the honeybee. So it has destroyed the feral colonies of honeybee in trees over much of Eastern Australia. So birds, possums, gliders have got their hollows back. So from my point of view, that's good. For beekeepers who keep their bees in boxes, which are managed, that's okay. It's okay if you've got them in boxes and they're managed. You've probably got to I've got to come up with a different term. It's a managed exotic, not a feral exotic. But in West Australia, they managed to keep small hive beetle out. So feral honeybees are widespread, occupying a large number of hollows in trees. This is one, the parrot there is Carnaby's cockatoo on the endangered species list. And that's one of the ones losing out to the dominance of the honeybee in West Australia. So much so that they're putting up artificial nest sites to try and give a bird a chance in preference to the bee. They don't seem to want to poison the bee because the poison might get to other insects, because they do have an interesting collection of solitary bees over there. And we've had one more introduction of recent years, Apis cerana, into northern Queensland, the Asian honeybee. When I was in Townsville, the prediction was made by one of the Townsville beekeepers that would become the pet bee for beekeepers. Small nest, relatively peaceful bee, forms nests in just about anything, mailboxes, jugs. But it's spread over a big area of North Queensland. But there are still efforts underway to control it, to eradicate it. But it came by boat. But by and large, my suspicion is that they have missed the boat in the control efforts. It's got too widely spread. Once it gets into the rainforest, there's a lot of country to cover. The real fear with that is it is a host for varroa mite. This particular one didn't bring varroa mite, which will devastate our bee industry. Did have mites, but not the varroa destructor. So the bee industry could breathe a very definite sigh of relief for that occasion. But there have been several more instances where this bee has come by sea in trade, under containers, in containers. Has anyone got colonies of stingless bees? Boxes or logs? Logs. Logs.
Oh, sorry, I've got
You've got both.
the clay banks and the burrows, the blue banded.
Oh, you've got blue bandits, yes.
Yeah, and teddy bear and iridescent and black and white spot. I've seen them all.
Yep. So you've got solitary bees in the clay bank.
Solitary bees.
Yeah. Is that exposed or under the house?
Under the house.
Which is, I've got some photos of those, and I'll mention that then. I'm very easily sidetracked, I can tell you.
Sorry.
I will mention when I get to it, but I've got some videos on YouTube, and when you look at those videos, you'll see how easily I'm sidetracked. This is Tetragonella carbonaria. It's the main species that used to be here in Brisbane. 6 years ago, it's pretty much the only one you'll see, but that has changed for some reason. If you're buying boxed colonies of single species, it's the one you'll still predominantly buy. I was not prepared to work with this type of box, a rectangular box without support at the midline. I've been to the workshops where that sort of method is demonstrated, and decided that was the only way that they could be kept. I'd leave them in logs. But of course, it didn't take long before I got logs that simply were falling apart, and I had to find a box. That is what I did. What I call dry split separators, and that was the very first that I did. That has evolved to this system. And that's just a reminder of what a split in a rectangular box can look like. It can be I regard as very traumatic. It certainly kills a lot of bees. All the honey that drains out from the honey pots that you cut at that midline runs down through the box. It's about a cup of honey. Because all my boxes have drains in. I quite specifically put a drain in the bottom. If I'm going to transfer a colony for any reason from a tree or water meter box, I need to get that spilt honey out so it's not in the hive for bees to drown in. So I divide the drain and it comes out the front. The reason it's out the front, not underneath, I can see it. I know what's happening. If it's too much, next time I've got to do it better. That photo's probably my most well-known photo. That one's been around the world. And one of the photos I've been paid for. A European magazine used that photo. It's made up to Brazil. The other species that is now dominating in Australia is Tetragonella hawkinsii. I do use Trigona. I probably should update the name. Trigona is the name they used. I've grown up with, but in the last couple of years it's been changed to Tetragonella. Much harder to say. In Southern America they have trigona. The entomologist sat down and looked at them, decided our trigona weren't related. The Brazilians had trigona first, so we had to have a change to wear tetragon in it. A little bit up closer, of the advance in front in the colony. The species that is around here almost totally now is tetragon Bulimba. It's taken over in the swarms that I'm getting close to 100%, and that's happened in 6 years. Now why that's happened, I don't know. That should be stood up, of course, but it will be much smaller. This is the bottom. This is the brood, the reproductive part of the nest. That might be the one. And the entrance to this hive was around the other side of this log at about that level. Normally they'll locate their brood very close to the level of the entrance into a tree, and fairly close to that level they'll store pollen. You can see the pollen here where some have been broken, and above it they'll normally put honey. Occasionally below. That's a pretty definite, a pretty common arrangement of a nest. If I had that log today, I would most definitely not be cutting the bees out. I would leave it in the log. That log is just too good to cut up. But then everyone was cutting them out and putting them into boxes. Now what I'll do is cut it off at this level, which is at the level of the honey, and I would put a honey super on top. I can get probably more honey from that hive in collecting it straight from the log than I can by putting it into a box, because the log has got better insulation thermal mass properties than any of our boxes. I spent 10 years trying to get boxes right. No one else has even tried. I'm making progress, but a hollow log is, especially one like that, is by far the best home for bees. This is that brood I didn't bring my pointer. In that nest. The queen is lying at this point. It's surrounded by insulation layers here, and called an involucrum. It is layered. This is the Hawkins layers, so the layers aren't as clear cut as carbonaria, but you can see the layers. The cells are built out of cerumen, which is a mixture of wax and resin. I've got photos later that will actually show nurse bees stocking the cells. When they have the right amount of food in, the queen lays, the worker bees close them. That is all the food that egg gets to produce a worker bee. To produce a queen, they simply put more food in, about 3 times the amount, between 3 and 4 times the amount. So the queen is always lying there, so this face is going upwards. That means the eggs and then larvae are getting older as you come down this way. You note the change in colour. Once the egg hatches, which just takes a few days, and the larvae grows, come down here, it spins a cocoon. Once the cocoon is spun, the cerumen can be taken off, and then it is recycled back up to produce more cells. So these are then just, these cocoons basically hold the larvae, which change into a pupae. You can see the form of a pupae just here. They're still developing, but the residue of this process is up there, and the oldest bees at this point, and that was the point that they're hatching. So they're hatching and hatching upwards. So this is called the advancing front, that's the receding front. Eventually that will get right to the top, by which time the gap will open here, the queen will start laying at the bottom. All fairly much in balance. This one, I think, very nicely in balance. But once you put it into a box, it can get out of balance, because we simply don't give them enough space. We don't. Our boxes, we give them our view of the space, not their view. In a log, they most times they've got this. They can extend upwards at their choice. But it is possible for a boxed colony to become nest bound. Now there is another group of bees, the Ostropobia. Not so many down around this area, but just go a little bit west, you will find them. Their brood structure is very different. Could say they're, in evolution terms, they're a little bit more primitive. But their work habit is very, very different to the Tetragonula. They're a very laid back bee. If there's nothing out there to get in terms of food, they simply stay home. I've got someone that's got 600, I know someone's got 600 hives of these. He calls them dole bludgers. If it's not warm enough, if there's any wind, if there's no food, they just simply stay home and do nothing. If there's a decent food source, they will work harder than any hive of Tetragonula for as long as that food source lasts. When the food source stops, so do they. But the net effect of that is that those bees each bee will live for 6 months. The Tetragonula, each bee only lives for 6 weeks. So their strategy is survival. And they survive right out into the desert country, and that's their evolutionary place, is in very dry, very intermittent country. They do have a few issues, at least I've found, but that's our North Queensland version. They have some characteristic markings. You can see on the thorax at the top end of the wings there's some little white markings. The species down here, Australis, doesn't have that full set. It doesn't have the one up the side of the thorax. They're repeated the other side, so there's 6 markings. It's a full set. If Australis only has 4. It has those 2 and repeated the other side. North Queensland, you've got several species that have the side markings. But this is the box that's been made to suit the brood structure of this species with a vertical split. Does work with some of these other species, but it's a bit hard. There's another species down inland of the Gold Coast, Tetragonula davenporti. Very plastic, unusual and small bee. Could well be a hybrid between Hawkinsi and Carbonaria. There's probably only a couple of dozen colonies in boxes, and I suspect in the wild it will disappear because Hawkinsi is sweeping southwards. I know it's down to Ravina, it's swarming and overrunning colonies at Bulimba, and this little fellow has got no chance against Hocking's eye. We simply won't know what's happened to that because it's too similar to Hocking's eye. It will disappear. That's the bee. It is a very neat little bee. Then we get to some of the solitaries. Those who know the blue-banded bee, that's it. Fascinating bee. It has, I don't know if any of you are into photography, but I try to take photographs of these bees, and they seem to like turning the tables. I get out there with the camera to try and get a photograph, and it's amazing how often the bee will swing around and just eyeball me, just out there, and watch me. But I have not, I thought, now that would be a fantastic photo, but I've never yet been able to get my focus onto that bee. It is a buzz pollinator. Things like tomatoes, capsicums, eggplants. They have been adapted for use in greenhouses commercially. There was an effort to bring bumblebees to mainland Australia because they are already in Tasmania. Another sad story of an introduction that shouldn't have happened, and they're all right across Tasmania, even up on the alpine grass areas. I was amazed when that was the first place I saw bumblebees. That is the only bee I happily kill. It's a teddy bear bee. And that's on the centre. It'll be on the centre of Clinus. We heavily plant natives at our place. It had to be either centre of Clinus or centre, the scrambling centre. Yeah, well, shouty eye. My scrambling centre is now up about 15 metres, so it has scrambled. It was the main flower was just at the photo level. This is a cousin, another armadillo, smaller bee. I've only ever seen it on that scrambling centre of Sanford. Apart from out at Ballindine, I have a friend out there who's a keen photographer. There's a lot more out there. For those who have a lot of blue-banded bees and nest sites on them, you should also have this one, because it is a cuckoo bee. It will lay its eggs in the nest of the blue-banded bee. And that's probably the most attractive, the most beautiful bee of all the bees in Australia. It's just a spectacular. When you see it, it's quite a thrill to see that. Not real sure how a cuckoo bee makes such a show of itself when you think it wants to be secretive and so forth. Yeah, there it is. Then we've got our biggest bee. That's a 3 centimetre long bee. I was very excited when I first saw that. Now, at 10:30 in the morning, in summer it flies on a routine through our garden. We can hear them coming from 10, 20 metres away. I get into trouble with my wife and my hearing. I'm sure there's a few men, probably a few women. In Canada we were travelling, and travelling to me means from B spot to B spot. And we were up high in the Rockies in June, which should be their summer. I was walking in snow, exactly this gear, with a jacket. room up here doesn't know what's happening down underneath. There was only one plant flowering, and I knew the bumblebee was going to that plant. I had to scramble up the road cutting. Life was left on the road in the snow. Hiking in Canada is completely different to hiking here. There are things there that can bite. And in tall pine forest you can't see. You've got this thick, dark forest, so you've got no idea what's in there. My wife was not at all comfortable being on her own down the road. We had already seen tracks, and here was me sitting up on waiting for this bee to come, and she was getting impatient. And I said, okay, it's coming, it's down there. This is about 20 metres away. The bee made its way up to where I was, because they're very systematic bumblebees. They have their patrol. I got my photo, scrambled down. The wife just looked at me. And when you're driving in a very big RV, and she looked at me and said, you can hear a single bumblebee at 20 metres, and you can't hear me sitting in the truck beside you. When we go home, you'll get hearing aids. But it's not the problem at all. It's all to do with the frequency of the wife's voice. Hearing aids like that. I've still got the problem. That's a different hearing aid, a different carpenter bee. Now, carpenter bees nest in soft timber, jacaranda, mango, gums even sometimes, dead branches. But I've certainly heard of African tulip tree, which is a tree I love to hope. But it has soft timber. They will chew their way into that. In Southern America, their carpenter bees actually love this copper chrome that CCA timber that's used for park constructions. It's always perforated with nests of these bees, which I thought was fantastic, but the park people have done.
So do the bees actually dig into the
Yes, they dig into the timber.
Have they done any studies on the effect of them?
Oh, the timber just looked like Swiss cheese. So it doesn't seem to. Yeah.
Can you differentiate male and female bees?
You can, yes. There's different structure. I'm not an entomologist. Typically, there's a difference in size, and depending on how they carry pollen, you can pick the difference in the pollen structures. Males don't have it. Now, that one is going to be a female, because this bee carries pollen on the leg, and that's a very pronounced brush structure. The male simply wouldn't have that brush to that extent, but I've never seen a male of that species. Yeah, the challenge is seeing the males. Reed bee is another interesting little species. People like to clean lantana out. It's not a desirable plant, but if you see holes in the stems of lantana, it's probably this kind. So it is a plus. Just don't clean the lantana before you need to. It is habitat, and if there are holes in it, maybe relocate it.
Is that a native bee?
It's an native bee. There are very few, there's only half a dozen bees that aren't native. All my photos here, tell this guy you've got a little cut off rear end. That is on cobbler's pegs. So it's only a tiny bee. But they can get them. Then we get to the resin bees. If you've got stingless bees which collect resin, you will attract various resin bees. The top one is Megachile mystatiana, the bottom one Megachile denii. I could, almost anywhere in Brisbane, I couldn't open a long colony of stingless bees without attracting the little one, the Megachile denii. They will just appear. They're all over Brisbane. At home, I'm hard pressed to even getting the inspection off without them coming. They smell the resin.
And do they live in hives or
All these are solid. These are all solitaries. Now this is the male of Megachile mystacea, which is a species related to the big one. Big one there, that's a female, and that's the male of a very closely related one. You can see there's a little white ruff around the neck. The female of that species also has the white fluff around the neck. But I can't say I've seen it, but the males tend to find where the females are foraging and stake out the side. And then they'll chase other males away. They get this territorial thing happening. Then on Scabola, you get this small resin bee, and that Scabola is quite small, so that resin bee is tiny, but I suspect that is a specific flower-plant relationship, because it's the only bee I've seen that is doing opening the pollen receptors properly by going in under it to get the nectar down here. So you can see the pollen over the back of the bee. My little stingless bees, they go looking for the nectar. They just sneak inside. So they don't pollinate at all. But in Australia, no one looks at those things. Go to Brazil, that will be known. Then we've got another resin bee, a large black resin bee, punctata that on top of it. It's bigger than a honeybee. I thought always put out scraps of resin materials so they come to me, I don't have to look for them normally. But that's one that I also have the male for, and that's it. It's on a Plectranthus. Plectranthus is a great plant for attracting a lot of our native bees, solitary and stingless. It was doing its thing, staking out the plant that it decided was a good plant, but it rained. Of course, it's still carrying the evidence of that rain overnight. I thought it was funny, but it probably didn't think it was funny, but it made a good photo. Now, sometimes when bees nest, if they're nesting in a tube, they get the depth wrong. They nest in places they got, and the depth isn't right. If it's a very long tube, the female will initially lay female eggs and then male. So the males come out first. These are all males. No point pointing there, but this is an aggregation of males that hadn't been seen before, but it's caused by the female producing too many male eggs, most likely because the hole she was nesting in was too deep. If you're going to look at assisting these various bees, you need to, there's a depth, a diameter and depth for each bee that is optimum for this. Then we've got leaf cutters. That's on part of India, Vargasrima. And they have a different method of carrying pollen. They have a scoper, banks of hairs under the abdomen. Works for them. Whole bean is one of the plants is quite useful for them. This particular bee and I had a bit of a run-in on my workbench. There's a hole on my bench vise. It wanted to nest in that because I was trying to use the bench vise. So I had, the only way we could have peace, because I was getting buzzed as I was trying to work, was for me to drill holes the same size in a block of wood, put it beside it to give it its own holes, and then I could have the bench vise. But you can see the bee, it's actually gone in head first, and then it's turned round. This is a 6mm hole. It turned round and then it unloads the pollen into the hole. Then there is one other introduced bee that's very common around Brisbane. That's in the leafcutter family. It's called a carder bee. It's about 8mm long. Very photogenic, almost as I would like to camera. Does a good job of pollinating, as you can see. But it builds its nest out of plant fibres, which it collects from the leaf, the surface of leaves. And here it's rolling up the leaves, the fibres from the surface of the plant. You see it's got its own little cotton ball. It'll fly back to its nest. Now it's not so much a hive, but it will be an aggregation of females, there'll be more than one. And that's a collection. There'll be several females there. Now I have done like most stingers people, put a hive out, bait it with wax and resin and hoping I'd get a swarm of stingers bees. What I got was these. I got the fire-tailed resin bee, and I got leaf cutters. So I've got 3 different solitary bees, all using this box. It's just gradually filling up, and they're all 3 bees are coming via the same entrance. Then there's I'll just go through these, the whole collection of others. There's one of the ground dwelling ones. That was interesting because the Australian, I reported that one to a fellow at the Australian Museum. And he came up to look at that one because their nesting site wasn't known until I found that. And I call these barcoded bees. They're typically black. Well, I just got a photo of a bright green one with yellow or white barcode stripes on it. And another. But all these are amongst our solitaries. Now you can help these along. This is a friend made this house to these various solitaries. That's a black resin bee. Inspecting the picking which accommodation anyone a leaf cutter has already finished that. This is some form of mud wasp. I'm quite happy for that to happen. And that's a Megachili denii looking into that hole. This one obviously considers that hole taken. And you can provide artificial accommodation for blue banded bees. The challenge is getting the right mix. That's my version of I call it a bee condo. Just hang them up around our courtyard, make it aggressively filled, and I'll replace the box a couple of years down the track. Easier to replace, but me being me, I do it in such a way that there's a plastic layer. I can pull it to pieces so I can see them developing. I don't have anything that I can't look into. And if you have stingless bees and you it's in a tree and the tree has to come down, this was actually a tijuana, which was quite an invasive tree, if you've got one, you'll end up with a lot more, and they suck up. The resident wanted to get rid of the tree, but there were stingless bees in the trunk. In Brazil, they actually plant this tree. That's where it came from, so it's quite remembered. But they plant avenues of it because they know it pipes as a young tree. So if you plant an avenue, they can expect in a person's lifetime they'll have an avenue of trees with bees in. At the University of Sao Paulo, I spent days walking around that place, but there are 2,000 colonies, stingless bees, just out around the grounds at the university. So I only just scratched the surface in that place. The underpaths and in the brickwork and in the trees, yes. But if you don't necessarily have to take the whole tree. You can just cut it off above where the nest, well above where the nest is, cap it, and that trunk is going to last for a long time. Now, African tulip tree. I don't know how this message hasn't got to Australia, but in Brazil it's widely known. The local TV stations put out a notice when the tree starts flowering each year. Basically every bee that gets to the tree dies. The tree doesn't want bees moving the pollen. The pollinators are a larger, it's a bird or a bat. So the tree has evolved a system where bees are rapidly killed. Now, they talk about nectar, and nectar, chemically, just about every part of the tree has some activity. You can analyse leaves, parts of the flower, roots. It all has some form of alkaloid activity. But my suspicion is, from a bee point of view, it's something to do with this activity here on the stigma. To get something done in Australia, that's a challenge. Maybe the QUT is looking at doing some work in the near future, hopefully. Fingers crossed, toes crossed if I could. Australia doesn't seem to believe any scientific work if it's not done in Australia for some reason. We've got a strange attitude. And if it's written in a foreign language, that's too hard. I managed in Brazil for 2 months on my own. So if I can do it, anyone should be able to do it. And the other tree that causes a bit of drama for stingless beekeepers is Kadagi. Corinthia torrelliana. It's not nice for gardeners with plants underneath because you get this sooty mould under juvenile trees. But the flower itself is just a conventional eucalypt. It produces nectar, it produces pollen. But when the seed capsule ripens and opens, inside that seed capsule is a very pure resin, which stingless bees are just completely addicted to. And this bee is inside a Kadagi seed capsule collecting that resin. So it's in its mouth parts and on the leg. They will fly twice as far, up to a kilometre, to get that because they can smell it. At home, our whole yard smells of that resin in the January-February season when that is coming in. And there's not many trees at our place. People do say it kills hives. I tend to say it will kill hives if the hives aren't designed properly. If the entrance is in the wrong place, that can happen. And how it happens is when the bees come out that seed capsule, they are carrying seeds and seed debris, which they cart back to the hive. That's not intentional. It just sticks to the resin. Then the bees, of course, have to get rid of it. They try, but they can't. They have to leave it at the entrance, near the entrance, often inside. So it's very easy for the entrance to be blocked. If the entrance is blocked, then of course the hive will die because it suffocates. Quite simple to have an entrance that isn't so placed that that happens. Now, I commented that I wasn't prepared to use the original type of boxes. That was one of my very early boxes, in which I actually did put wire mesh to support. Discarded that, it was just too messy, and it's galvanised. You've got galvanised material in there, it's going to rust and release heavy metals. I've evolved to what I call a dry split box. Now this is someone else's. He used thin boards of western red cedar, 2 slits on each side, and the brood spiral would develop through it. His rationale, when I asked him why he did it, because it's right. There's no destruction, the hive, no honey pots, pollen pots broken. And the reason that is important, when you break honey pots like this, it becomes attractive for the 3 main insect pests of stingless bees: surfer flies, forward flies, and small hive beetle. Now when you do a split, as it has been called, with these boxes, I talk about division, I've taken them out. The bees are very vulnerable. If you do not spill honey, as you do in the best of those, it's just not attractive, pure and simple. If you go overseas to Brazil, they simply don't. We're the only country in the world that does it that way. And I struggle to find the reason that we keep doing it without looking to what's happening elsewhere. That was my early steps. The other thing that I do see is happening here that's just so different to everywhere else. The main box here in Australia has a lid that is nailed and screwed down on top. You just cannot see into the box. You cannot see what's happening in the box. Every one of my hives has this inspection panel. Now, I spent 2 months in Brazil, and prior to me going there, I always used a Perspex panel, which is rigid. Of course, if you lift that, everything in the box is broken, every structure. If you have a flexible panel like this, you don't necessarily have to lift the whole thing. You can control it, just lift half if you want to. I like to say that I woke up to that on that Brazilian trip. It was a $20,000 2-month trip, and that was the biggest thing I found. But I've adapted this concept to so many different shapes. That's a cardinal box I made, carbonaria on the right, poppyfly on the left. That's a very common shelter for stingless bees in Brazil. Another box from Brazil. They call it the smart box, Acacia intelligenta. And what has since come out of Brazil, I've got in. Brazil is just a melting pot of ideas. You just can't keep up with them. What they've done, boxes out in the weather, you have to have timber that takes the weather. If you have a box like that takes the weather, and then you put inside it lighter timber that doesn't take the weather, it could be much, the inside box can be much cheaper. There are a series of videos by Ailton Fontana, and he has gone so close to making single speeds into a framed hive. And I show this to people here in Australia with single speeds, and still not even a murmur of interest. It's just absolutely amazing what they do. Brazil, 50 years ahead conservatively. This box is fundamentally Brazilian, but I went there with the concepts in use at home, came back and refined. But that's actually, this is actually the other half of this carbonara economy. As a full column. Now that's inside one of these boxes once it's full at the time of splitting. Now there you will see the queen. Just here. Now there are a lot. You see down here another banded bee. And you see a lot of banded bees with their heads in cells there. Another one up there. They're actually nursery bees. They're a younger bee that's involved in stocking the cells with food before the queen lays. But if you see that as the queen, and this one stocking food, you can understand how people wonder what they're seeing with that one. I still do it and think, maybe they're unmated queens, but there's not. I have to accept that they're nursery bees, but I see some of them. I have to think unmated queens. Now that's how my boxes look. That's in the splitting position. Now I've evolved, I started with PET plastic. As you can see, it was flexible and I could work it in the workshop. I found I could get a thin ply which was chemically better for the bees. There is a space between, but then I found I could get stainless steel laser cut, and the bees see it's just the bees and bees. They accept the stainless steel just like that. I can ring up and order it, and it's fantastic. And that is the splitting process, or division process as I call it. You end up with the box, with brood, stores around it, that goes on to that is it. That is placed on the new base. An empty box put on top, another inspection panel, and then you've got a new hive. Now I do have YouTube videos, and it's called a division. Just underline if you look at YouTube on Robert Lutterall. I'm having to hurry up. If you had flower pots, self-watering flower pots, it's one of the places they like to get in the water chamber. So I always say, use self-watering flower pots, you just never know, you might get a swarm. I missed a photo of in Brazil. The photo that's missing there was actually one of the current method of honey harvesting in Australia, which really is if anyone's been to the workshops that show it, it's not very nice. It involves a honey structure being crushed and then poured through a strainer, an endless number of bees being drowned, incorporated in the honey. That was the other thing that I've since told Tim. but I was not prepared to do. If that was the only way of harvesting honey, I'd never be collecting honey, and I'd never use that method. So that really has been a driving force to find better ways. And the reason for that, in Brazil, I saw in the university presentation photos of that technique on honey harvesting. They're showing to students and beekeepers. Their beekeepers have to have a license, and they have to have the qualification to get that license. And these photos were used as an example of how not to do it. And then they go on to show how to do it. As an instructor, the only side in there was more than a little bit embarrassing. I recognise who were doing it. This is one of the Brazilian techniques given to me by a Brazilian, a suction device. Now, this is my take on for current systems. Those with rectangular boxes. Now, what I didn't do was bring the box to show, but the box is simply placed. It's never used as a honey receptacle, always face down. It's pushed down onto the spikes once. This then levers the box up, do it the other way, the rods hold it up, and then it drains. Honey goes straight down through the mesh, out of the reach of the bees. The average number of bees killed in the tray has been about 7. The box that I normally use it in has holes at the top, and all the bees that are there just stream out the top. The loss of bees is very low. But above all, at least I'm making an effort. I have not been able to convince the other method is on YouTube if you care to look. That was developed for those people with existing boxes. But I wasn't content with that because I've always had the intent of getting these bees to a framed hive, or hard framed hive. Now there's the first frame. Double frame, nesting structure, and the bees happily putting honey pots into a 3D plastic printed structure. And there's one. My wife's desk was now pushed down to the corner of the room as I put the second 3D printer. And she has to put up with the smell of plastic. This one is using a plastic called T-glaze, which is FDA food rated for contact with food storage. Specifically designed with absolute minimum contact with the honey. It really all it does is provide the bees with an outline. I'm fascinated that they use it, but it provides a base, and I've got to have a base. It just provides posts on the 4 corners and the 4 top being around the corner. It's a challenge to print, but the bees just interestingly just do it row by row. They are quite systematic. This one, these nests, by the way, they sit in the top, and then these. They drop in there, 3 fit in these boxes. And that's how I envisage my boxes for the future. Storage, 3 of those in the bottom, honey, 3 in the top. So, needless to say, I'm not, that really says it all. I'm not quite into the sitting still with a box with these if you can't take the lid off. I'm all for moving things. And this I have patented because to my knowledge no one in the world has achieved that. Not even the Brazilians, and I was very pleased to be able to get one.
You've shown them.
Yes. Well, they are very proud of what they do, and it's rightly so. And many, many times it's taken from them in the patents developed overseas. They're fiercely nationalistic. When I first joined the B group over there, the B group didn't want my English appearing on the emails. I always put both. I didn't want to be lynched for what I didn't really say because the translator got it wrong. And so I said, well, that's okay. I'll put the Portuguese first. So we had this diplomatic discussion going that how I should post. But that's the sort of level of discovery. But that was caused by the fact they've had things that were developed and they didn't, and it was taken overseas. And then research is done, and it has to, the results have to be written in English. And it's not written in Portuguese. So the Brazilian company, this is crazy. Yet they're by far the most advanced bee company on the planet. They had a box way better than the box that dominates Australia in 1949. I had lunch with the fellow who put it out. He's their leading researcher in his 90s now. He gave me the shells of the box in timber. I had to talk to get back to the quarantine. I said, you can do whatever you like to it. Dip it in whatever nasty chemicals. There's never going to be any bees in here. But I want that box. It was who gave it to me. But 1949. We got a box that's primitive by their standards in 1988. And a simple literature scan would have found what Brazil was doing. But the internet wasn't available. It would have to be a bit of library work. I do get upset with all that because I didn't have signs ahead of it. The same union ahead of when that war happened. I had to do the library work at the same time. When it was all books and journals.
Okay, we might stop there. They've been absolutely fascinating. So what we might do is thank Bob, and we'll have morning tea, and then after morning tea we'll go out and do the placement. So absolutely fascinating. If you've got any questions for Bob, just chat to him over morning tea. So thank you, Bob. That was really good. Morning tea out this way. Come and help yourselves.